Most people who go to Bali never see it. They see beaches. They see Kuta at sunset, Canggu before noon, Seminyak after dark. They see a yoga retreat in Ubud and a Julia Roberts movie playing in their head, while a woman in a sarong pours warm water over their hands. They see a $5 plate of nasi goreng and a $400 a night villa, and a sky filled with paper kites at the end of the dry season. All of that is real. None of that is wrong. But Bali is not those things. Bali is the only Hindu-majority province in the largest Muslim-majority country on Earth. It is governed not by one calendar, but by three: the Gregorian for schools and flights, the Saka for the New Year, and the Pawukon for almost everything else. A 210-day cycle of ceremonies, auspicious days, and obligations that runs underneath the surface of every Balinese life. It is home to an ancient democratic water-sharing system that UNESCO has recognized as the only one of its kind. A 1,000-year-old institution still managing the rice terraces today. It has more than 20,000 temples on an island smaller than Connecticut. And every year, for one day, the entire island stops. The airport, the streets, the lights, the conversations. For 24 hours of silence. What most visitors see is the coastline. What they don't see is what holds the island together when the planes stop landing. How does a place this layered survive being everyone's favorite holiday? To understand Bali, you have to start with a fact that almost no first-time visitor knows. When the Hindu Majapahit Empire fell to Islam in the 16th century, collapsing the last great Hindu kingdom in the archipelago, its priests, nobles, artists, and scholars did not vanish. They moved. They crossed a narrow strait to the east, to an island already half Hindu, and they brought their gods and their courts and their dancers and their script with them. They built temples in the mountains and palaces in the lowlands. They preserved a Hindu civilization that had been wiped out everywhere else around them. 500 years later, Bali is what they built. Roughly 87% of its population is Hindu. The rest of Indonesia, more than 270 million people, is roughly 87% Muslim. The island is a religious archipelago of one, surrounded by the largest Muslim nation in the world. And yet, most visitors arrive without knowing this at all. They land at Ngurah Rai International Airport in the south, and within 40 minutes, they are at a beach club in Seminyak. They see a coastline. They see a few temples on the route, perhaps a photo at Tanah Lot or Uluwatu. They go home with photographs of waves and rice fields and a tattoo of an Om symbol that for the Balinese is not a decoration, but a prayer. The real Bali is not hiding. It is happening in front of them. They are simply not equipped to read it. On every doorstep, 3 times a day, a woman places a small palm leaf basket no bigger than her hand. Inside it, a flower, a pinch of cooked rice, a stick of incense, a few coins. This is Kanang Sari. Nearly 6 million of these offerings are placed across the island every single day. They are not for the tourists. They are not even for the gods exactly. They are for the demons, placed on the ground, low, so the spirits of the earth are fed before they grow angry. The Balinese feed both sides of the cosmos before they feed themselves. and not one of these offerings is in the guidebook. Time itself works differently here. Most of the world keeps one calendar. Bali keeps 3. The Gregorian runs the airport schedules and the school year and the office hours. The Saka calendar, inherited from India and adjusted across 2 millennia, governs the lunar months and the major holy days. And then there is the Pawukon. And the Pawukon is the one that matters. The Pawukon does not measure years. It does not track the moon. It does not align with the sun. It is a 210-day cycle divided into 30 weeks, and within those weeks runs smaller cycles, 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, all the way up to 10 day, that overlap and intersect to give every single day a different character. There are auspicious days for weddings, for funerals, for cutting hair, for blessing books, for honoring animals. There are 6 Tumpek days in each cycle, when the gods of plants, instruments, weapons, knowledge, livestock, and ironwork are honored in turn. A Balinese priest, asked when something should happen, does not consult one calendar. He consults all of them at once. Most Balinese never speak about it in those terms. It is simply the rhythm they were born into. A child knows, by the way the offerings change shape on a particular morning, what kind of day it is. A farmer knows when to plant. A fisherman knows when not to launch. A grandmother knows when her ancestors are most likely to be listening. For the tourist, none of this is visible. The Pawukon day on which they arrive looks exactly like the Pawukon day before and the one after. The penjor poles bending over a back lane mean nothing to them. The extra incense smoke in the household shrine means nothing. The fact that every temple on the island holds its own anniversary celebration, an Odalan, every 210 days, 20,000 temples on a rolling schedule, means that somewhere on Bali, on any given day, a ceremony is happening. The visitor never registers it. They are walking through a calendar they cannot read. To understand the calendar, you have to climb the mountain. In the east of the island, 10,000 feet above the sea, stands Mount Agung, Gunung Agung, the Great Mountain. It is the highest point in Bali and an active volcano, and it is, in the eyes of every Balinese, the center of the universe. According to one myth, when the gods made the world, they found Bali unstable, wobbling in the sea. To still it, they took a fragment of Mount Meru, the holy mountain of Hinduism, the axis of all creation, and they set it down upon the island. That fragment is Agung. To the Balinese, the mountain is not a metaphor for sacred. The mountain is sacred. It is literally the navel of the world. Every house on the island is oriented to it. People sleep with their heads toward it. Maps are drawn with it at the top. Directions are not given as north or south, but as Kaja toward the mountain and Kelod toward the sea. To turn one's back on the mountain is to commit a small kind of disorientation. On its southwestern slope, nearly a kilometer up, sits Pura Besaki, the mother temple of Balinese Hinduism. It is not one temple. It is 23 temples terraced into the volcano's flank, rising step by step toward the summit. The complex has stood on this site for at least 1,000 years. Some of its stone bases are older, predating Hindu influence entirely, megalithic platforms from a time before the Balinese had a name for what they were doing. In February of 1963, the priests of Besaki begin their preparations for Ekadasa Rudra, a once-in-a-century purification ceremony, the holiest rite in the Balinese calendar. The mountain, dormant for 120 years, begins to rumble. The priests take this as a warning. They go to President Sukarno, who has arranged for diplomatic guests to witness the ceremony, and ask him to postpone it. Sukarno refuses. On March 18, 1963, Mount Agung erupts. The blast sends ash 10 kilometers into the sky. Pyroclastic flows, superheated gas and rock traveling at 60 kilometers an hour, pour down the mountain in the wrong direction, toward villages instead of toward Besaki. By the time the eruption phase ends, more than 1,500 people are dead. 86,000 are homeless. Cold lahars, triggered by the rains that follow, kill another 200. And the temple? The temple is untouched. The lava has divided. It has flowed around Besaki, missing it sometimes by mere meters. For the Balinese, this is not chance. It is the gods making themselves heard. They had wanted to demonstrate their power. They had not wanted to destroy their own house. Ekadasa Rudra was finally completed in 1979. The next one is scheduled for the year 2079. Below the mountain, in the lowland forests at the western edge of the island, lives a bird that almost did not survive the 20th century. The Bali starling, Jalak Bali, is white, almost entirely white, with a yellow bill, a sky blue mask around each eye, and a crest of long, soft feathers that lifts in display. It is the only vertebrate species in the world found only on Bali, the only one, and it has been within a feather's width of extinction more than once. It was first described to science in 1912. By the 1970s, songbird collectors were paying small fortunes for a captured pair, more than a year's local wages. The bird was beautiful, and being beautiful, it was hunted. By 2001, only 6 wild Bali starlings remained on the entire island. The Bali starling, like its missing cousin the Bali tiger, shot to extinction by Dutch hunters in the 1930s, became a measure of how much the island had already lost. But the story did not end there. A coalition of conservation groups, breeders, and Balinese villagers began a quiet, decades-long program of release and protection. On Bali itself, and on the smaller island of Nusa Penida, just to the southeast. Today, the wild population numbers in the hundreds. They are watched over, in part, by farmers in their own family compounds. Birds and people are tied together again. The starling has become, in its slow recovery, what Bali itself is always being asked to be, a thing that survives because someone decided it should. If the mountain is the center of the universe, the water is the center of daily life. Bali's interior is mountainous, a spine of volcanoes running east to west. Rain falls on the high slopes, drains into volcanic lakes, and runs down the rivers toward the sea. The land between the mountains and the coast is steep, terraced, green. It is, almost everywhere you look, rice. But the rice is not just farming, it is engineering, it is theology, it is democracy. The system that grows it is called Subak. It is 1,000 years old. It is the only UNESCO World Heritage Site on the island, and it is the reason Bali has been able to feed a dense population on a small piece of land for as long as it has. A Subak is not a piece of irrigation infrastructure. It is a cooperative, an association of farmers, sometimes a few dozen, sometimes a few hundred, who share a single water source. They meet, they vote, they decide together when to plant, when to flood, when to drain, when to leave a field fallow. They police pests and pathogens through coordinated timing, If every farmer in a Subak plants on the same week, the pests have nowhere to retreat between fields, and they collapse. There are no government bureaucrats overseeing this. There are no chemical sprays. The system polices itself, and it has done so since the 9th century. At every level of the network, there is a temple. The mountain lake has a temple. The river has a temple. Each Subak has a temple. Each field has a small shrine where offerings are made before planting. Water is not a resource. Water is the visible body of a goddess, Dewi Danu, and to share it is a sacred act. The philosophy underneath all of this has a name, Trihita Karana, the three causes of well-being. It teaches that human happiness depends on three relationships in balance: between people and the divine, between people and other people, and between people and nature. Pull on any one of those, and the other two move. The Subak, more than any temple or palace or beach, is the working model of that philosophy. The water moves from the mountain to the sea because farmers in fields 100 kilometers apart agreed, in a temple by a lake, that it should. When biologists tried in the 1970s to modernize Balinese rice farming with synthetic fertilizers, new high-yield varieties, and centrally scheduled planting, the result was crop failure. Pests exploded, yields dropped. The Green Revolution broke against the older system. By the late 80s, anthropologists and agronomists were quietly admitting what the Balinese had always said. The Subak worked because the temples were part of it. The temples worked because the calendar told them when to act. Pull one thread and the cloth unravels. In 2012, UNESCO recognized the cultural landscape of Bali province, 5 sets of rice terraces and their water temples, as a site of outstanding universal value. The citation noted, in plain language, that the system was the most prolific rice-growing system in the archipelago, and one of the most ecologically sustainable farming methods anywhere in the world. 1,000 years of farmers in a temple deciding by vote has outperformed every modern alternative anyone has tried to impose on it. The Bali most foreigners come looking for did not exist before the 1930s. There was always a Bali, of course. There were palaces and dances and gamelan orchestras. There were rice terraces and ceremonies. But the version of Bali that Western visitors arrive holding in their heads, Bali as paradise, as art island, as a place where every villager is a sculptor, every grandmother is a dancer, every sunrise is a postcard. That Bali was, in large part, written by a small group of European and American visitors between the world wars. The German painter Walter Spies arrived in 1927. He settled in Ubud, in the foothills of the Central Mountains, and he stayed for 14 years. He spoke the language, he learned the music, he filmed the dances, he restaged the kecak, the rhythmic 100-man chant that visitors now line up to see at Uluwatu Cliff at sunset, adapting it from a trance ritual into a theatrical performance that could be staged for outsiders. The anthropologist Margaret Mead arrived in 1936 with her husband Gregory Bateson and produced a series of films and photographs of Balinese childhood that defined the field for a generation. The composer Colin McPhee transcribed the gamelan. The Mexican artist Miguel Covarrubias wrote the first popular Western book about the island. The English aristocrat Lady Diana Cooper called Bali the only place where she had wanted to die. By the end of the 1930s, the Bali these visitors had built in their books and films was already in part a reflection of itself. The Balinese, watching foreigners admire them, began to perform some of what was being admired. Cultural tourism was not invented in Bali, but Bali is one of the places where its modern form was perfected. In 1937, Vicky Baum published Love and Death in Bali, a novel inspired by the Puputan of 1906. In 2006, Elizabeth Gilbert published Eat, Pray, Love. In 2010, Julia Roberts arrived in Ubud and the script was rewritten one more time. The Bali that visitors now come to find, the Ubud of yoga and journaling and the spiritual reset, is not exactly an invention. It is more accurately a translation. A version of the island performed back to its visitors in the language they were already speaking when they arrived. To the south of Ubud, in the village of Padang Tegal, lives one of the densest concentrations of monkeys on the island. The sacred monkey forest is home to roughly 700 long-tailed macaques. They are intelligent, they are organized, they live in 4 troops, each with its own territory. They are, in a quiet way, one of the strangest animals on Bali, because they are one of the only animals that has done what almost no other land mammal on the island has managed to do. They have crossed the Wallace Line. In 1859, the British naturalist Alfred Russel Wallace drew an invisible line through the Indonesian archipelago, running between Borneo and Sulawesi to the north and between Bali and Lombok to the south. The line marks the boundary between 2 continental shelves and, more importantly, between 2 entirely different biological worlds. To the west in Bali, the wildlife is Asian: tigers, monkeys, deer, banyan trees. To the east in Lombok, just 35 kilometers away, the wildlife is Australasian: cockatoos, marsupials, birds that no Asian forest has ever seen. The strait between Bali and Lombok is only 35 kilometers wide, but it is 250 meters deep, too deep, even at the lowest sea level of the last ice age, to ever bridge. For millions of years, animals on Bali and animals on Lombok have evolved on either side of a wall they cannot see. The long-tailed macaque is one of the rare mammals that has crossed it, almost certainly by hitching rides with humans. In the temple forest of Ubud, in the gardens of Uluwatu, in the rice paddies of the south. The monkey that steals your sunglasses is the monkey that crossed the boundary of 2 continents. Bali sits on the edge of the largest landmass in human history and on the edge of one of the deepest oceanic divides on the planet. It is, in geological terms, a frontier island. It has always been a frontier. The Hindu Bali that almost everyone knows is not, in fact, the oldest Bali. Before the Majapahit Empire arrived in 1343, before the Hindu priests came across the strait from Java, there was already a people living on the island. They had been there for thousands of years. They were rice farmers and animists. They worshipped mountains and ancestors and trees. They had their own language, their own marriage rules, their own way of dying. When the Hindu kingdoms came, most of these people absorbed the new religion. They adapted. They incorporated the Hindu gods into the older worship of the spirits of the land. The hybrid faith that emerged, Agama Hindu Dharma, is what most Balinese practice today. But some did not adapt. Some retreated into the mountains. They are still there. They are called the Bali Aga, the original Balinese, or the Bali Mula, the first ones. They live in a handful of remote villages, Tenganan in the east, Trunyan on the shore of Lake Batur, others scattered across the highlands of Kintamani and Buleleng. Their language is a dialect older than standard Balinese. Their architecture, their marriage customs, their burial practices are all subtly, sometimes radically, different from the rest of the island. In Tenganan Pegringsingan, in the hills above the eastern coast, the houses are laid out along a single north-south concourse. The entrances are narrow, only wide enough for one person to pass through at a time. The village is walled. Outsiders cannot marry in. A Tengananese who marries an outsider must leave the village. The cloth they weave is called Gering Sing. It is the only true double ikat fabric in Southeast Asia, where both the warp and the weft threads are tie-dyed before weaving, so that the pattern emerges only as the loom moves. A single piece can take 5 years to complete. The Balinese believe it has the power to keep impurities and danger out of the village. It is worn at every rite of passage. It is laid beneath the cut hair of a newborn. It is wrapped around the dead at burial. On the eastern shore of Lake Batur, 3,000 feet up in the volcanic interior, lies another Bali Aga village, Trunyan. It is reachable only by boat. The hills above it cannot be crossed on foot. And in Trunyan, the dead are not cremated. Cremation, the rite that defines a Balinese Hindu funeral, would offend the spirit of Mount Batur. The Trunyanese believe that fire belongs to the volcano. To use it for human bodies is to insult the mountain. So they do not. Instead, they wrap their dead in white cloth, place them under bamboo cages in a small clearing behind the village, and let them decompose openly in the air. There should be a stench. There isn't. At the center of the clearing grows an enormous tree, Taru Menyan, whose name means fragrant tree. It releases a scent powerful enough to mask the decay of the bodies beneath it. The skulls of those who have decomposed are arranged on a stone platform nearby. Only 11 bodies are allowed in the cemetery at a time. When a new one arrives, the oldest is moved. Trunyan is what Bali was before Bali. It is older than the Mother Temple, older than the Subak, older than the Hindu names of its own gods. Almost no tourist who visits the island ever sees it. Almost none who do understand what they are looking at. Every 210 days, the ancestors come home. The festival is called Galungan. It is the most important recurring ceremony in the Pawukon calendar, the moment when the spirits of the deceased descend from the mountains, return to the family compounds where they once lived, and stay for 10 days. The Balinese receive them. They prepare offerings of cakes and roasted pig and fruit. They dress in their best ceremonial clothes. They pray at the family temple every morning. Down every village road, on the day before, the men of each household have raised a penjor, a long, arched bamboo pole, sometimes 10 meters tall, decorated with woven palm fronds, ears of corn, coconuts, and white or yellow cloth, bending gracefully over the lane. The penjor represents Mount Agung, the mountain bent downward like a stalk of rice, so the ancestors can find their way back to the place they were born. During the 10 days of Galungan, schools close. Government offices close. The roads are quieter than usual because half of urban Bali has driven back to their ancestral villages. On the 10th day, Kuningan, the spirits depart. Special yellow rice is prepared, blessed, and offered. The ancestors are sent back to the mountain. In 210 days, they will come back. This happens twice a year. It has happened every 210 days for at least 1,000 years. It is happening on some part of the island, somewhere, almost certainly, while this video is being watched. On the morning of September 20th, 1906, a Dutch military force approaches the royal palace at Denpasar. The Dutch have been on Bali for 60 years already, controlling the north of the island, where the Buleleng and Karangasem kingdoms fell to them in the mid-1800s. But the south has remained independent. 3 kingdoms, Badung, Tabanan, and Klungkung, still hold out. The Dutch have been waiting for a pretext to take them. In 1904, a Chinese-flagged Dutch trading ship called the Sri Kumala wrecked on a reef near Sanur. Balinese villagers, by an old customary rite called Tawan Karang, stripped the cargo. The Dutch demand compensation. The Raja of Badung refuses. The expedition that lands on the beach at Sanur in September of 1906 numbers around 4,000 soldiers. The Balinese army of Badung has spears, daggers, and a few old rifles. The Dutch advance inland without much resistance. By the morning of the 20th, they are at the gates of the royal palace in Denpasar. Smoke is rising from inside. Drums are beating. The gates open. A procession emerges. At its head is the Raja of Badung, borne on a palanquin by 4 bearers. He wears white cremation garments. He carries a ceremonial kriss. Behind him walk his wives, his children, his priests, his ministers, his guards. All in white. All armed only with daggers and spears. All silent. They move forward. The Dutch officers later wrote that they did not understand what they were seeing. At a certain distance from the Dutch line, the procession stops. The Raja is stabbed by his own priest. Around him, the others begin to stab each other and themselves. Those still standing turn and walk toward the rifles. The Dutch open fire. By the time it ends, around 1,000 Balinese are dead. The palace is looted and razed. That afternoon, in a second palace nearby, another, smaller puputan takes place. 2 days later, at Tabanan, the king and his son kill themselves in prison rather than accept exile. In April of 1908, the last independent kingdom, Klungkung, goes the same way. The Raja, Dewa Agung Jambe II, leads 200 followers in white against Dutch rifles. He carries a kriss that prophecy says will shatter the enemy. It does not. He is shot. His 6 wives kill themselves with their own krisses. The others follow. Today, where the royal palace of Denpasar once stood, there is a public square, Taman Puputan. At its center stands a bronze monument. A family of 4, holding daggers, frozen mid-step toward an enemy that is no longer there. The word Puputan means the end, the finish. It is what the Balinese chose, twice, rather than the humiliation of surrender. For the Dutch, the news of the killings was a public relations catastrophe. International press coverage was so brutal that the Netherlands, embarrassed, announced a new ethical policy for its colonies and committed to preserving Balinese culture as a living museum. Within a few years, the same colonial power that had massacred 1,000 Balinese in white cremation cloth was selling tickets to the island as a paradise. Half a century later, the killing came back. In October of 1965 in Jakarta, 6 Indonesian army generals were murdered in a confused and contested incident that was either an attempted coup or its pretext. The army blamed the Indonesian Communist Party, the PKI, the largest non-governing communist party in the world, with 3.5 million members and perhaps 20 million sympathizers. What followed, across the country, was one of the worst political killings of the 20th century. Between 500,000 and 1 million Indonesians were killed by army units, paramilitaries, and civilian mobs between October of 1965 and March of 1966. On Bali, the killing began in December. By early 1966, an estimated 80,000 Balinese were dead, 5% of the island's population, proportionally higher than anywhere else in Indonesia. Black-shirted youth militias moved village by village. Death squads operated for months. The populations of entire Balinese villages were halved in the last weeks of 1965. None of this is in the tourist guide. None of it is in the brochures. The Balinese, asked about it directly today, often go quiet. The killings are not openly discussed. The official history of Indonesia for decades blamed the dead. The new government that emerged from the violence, General Suharto's New Order, ruled the country for 33 years and made it a crime to speak well of those who had been killed. No one has ever been held accountable. The Indonesian government has issued vague promises and quiet acknowledgements, but no court has ever heard a case. The mass graves on Bali, families say there are many, have never been excavated. In 1963, the priests of Besaki warned Sukarno not to hold the once-a-century ceremony, and the volcano erupted. In 1965, the country tore itself apart, and Bali tore itself apart with it. For the Balinese, these were not separate events. They were the consequences of imbalance, of having pulled too hard on one of the three threads. Trihita Karana, the philosophy at the center of everything, teaches that the three relationships, with the gods, with each other, with nature, cannot survive if any one of them is broken. Two of them that decade broke. In the wet forests of the Central Highlands, on a wide leaf, in the slow light of a tropical morning, opens one of the largest moths on Earth. The Atlas moth has a wingspan close to 25 centimeters. Its wings are patterned with windowed shapes that resemble the heads of snakes at each tip, a defensive mimicry refined over millions of years. It has no functioning mouth. As an adult, it cannot eat. It lives for 1 or 2 weeks on the energy it stored as a caterpillar, and in that time, it mates, lays eggs, and dies. On an island where time is told in 210-day cycles and human lives are framed by ceremonies of return and departure, the moth is a small reminder. The cosmos does not ask anyone to live for very long. It asks only that they show up. The Bali that holds all of this together, the calendar, the temples, the rice terraces, the offerings, the silent grief of the older generation, is, in real terms, being eroded. Bali receives roughly 7 million international visitors a year. The population of the island is around 4.5 million. There are, on any given day in the peak season, more tourists in some parts of the south than there are Balinese. Tourism now generates about 60% of the Bali economy. It also consumes about 65% of the island's fresh water, almost all of it concentrated in the southern hotels and villas of Badung Regency, where Canggu, Seminyak, Kuta, and Uluwatu are clustered. Roughly 750 hectares of rice fields are lost every year, sold, paved, built over for new villas, new beach clubs, new infrastructure. The aquifer in the south is falling. Salt water is intruding into wells along the coast. In some villages, families now buy their drinking water by the truckload. The Subak system, recognized by UNESCO as one of the most ecologically sustainable farming systems on Earth, is shrinking as the rice fields shrink. The younger generations of farmers, watching the water disappear and the prices rise, are leaving the fields to work in the hotels. The Balinese government has begun, recently, to push back. A tourist levy was introduced in early 2024. There are conversations about limiting short-term rentals, about controlling new construction, about extending tourism to the quieter north and east of the island so that the south can breathe. The Penjor poles still rise on every back lane for Galungan. The Kanang Sari still appear on every doorstep 3 times a day. The temples still hold their Odalan ceremonies on the rolling Pawukon schedule. But the question that hangs over the island is the same question Tri Hita Karana has always asked. How long can 3 relationships stay in balance when one of them is being pulled this hard? To answer that question, the Balinese return, once a year, to the sea. The ceremony is called Melasti. It falls 3 or 4 days before Nyepi, the Balinese New Year of the Saka calendar, usually in March, occasionally in early April. On the appointed day, every village on the island carries its sacred objects to the coast. At dawn, the procession begins. Thousands of Balinese in white ceremonial dress walk from their village temple toward the nearest beach or river mouth. They carry the temple's pratima, the small sacred effigies in which the gods are temporarily housed, wrapped in cloth raised high. Gamelan musicians walk with them. Women carry towers of offerings on their heads. The line stretches for kilometers. At the water, the priests perform the purification. The temple effigies are dipped or sprinkled with seawater. Holy water is collected to be carried home. The sea, the place into which all impurity flows, is asked to take one more time what the year has accumulated. Then, with the gods cleansed, the procession turns and walks home. The mountain is waiting. The Penjor poles are already raised. The pratima are returned to their temples. The night before Nyepi has begun. On the eve of Nyepi, the demons come out. For weeks before the night, in every village across the island, the youth associations have been building. The structures they build are called ogo-ogo. They are giant, articulated, terrifying papier-mâché figures of demons, witches, and monsters from the Balinese cosmology. Rangsasa with bared fangs, Layak with their hair in flames, demonic queens with extra arms and ladles of fire. Some are 4 meters tall, some are 6. Each is mounted on a bamboo platform that the village men will carry on their shoulders. At dusk, on the day before Nyepi, the streets fill. The ogo-ogo are paraded through every village. Gamelan orchestras play at a pace they almost never reach the rest of the year, fast, percussive, deliberately aggressive. The demons are spun, jerked, lifted, lowered, swung at intersections so that, in Balinese belief, they become disoriented. The whole point is to draw out and confuse the negative spirits of the past year, to gather them in one place. And then, somewhere late in the night, the demons are burned. The papier-mâché figures, after weeks of labor by the youth groups, after one final parade, are set on fire. The flames rise above the village square. The negative spirits, drawn out by the noise and the procession, are believed to be consumed with them. Cymbals crash, firecrackers go off, pots and pans are banged from doorways, coconut leaf torches are lit and waved in the dark. Every household participates. The volume is deliberate. The chaos is the point. And then, sometime in the small hours of the morning, the noise stops. The fires burn down. The drums fall silent. The streets empty. The last person closes the last gate. By 6 in the morning, when the sun rises, Bali has gone quiet. Nyepi means silent. For the next 24 hours, from 6 in the morning until 6 the following morning, the entire island will stop. No work, no travel, no fire, no lights, no sound, no leaving the house, no going to the beach, no swimming, no surfing, no conversation, ideally, no noise. The airport closes. Ngurah Rai International, the third busiest in Indonesia, shuts down completely. No flights in, no flights out. The harbour closes. The ferries to Lombok and Java do not run. The internet, in some years, has been switched off by the government for the day. The roads are empty. They are not nearly empty. They are empty. There are no cars, no motorbikes, no bicycles, no pedestrians. The only people moving on the streets are pekalang, traditional village security officers in checked sarongs and turbans, patrolling the lanes to enforce the silence. They are quiet, too. They walk in pairs. They speak only when necessary. If you stand at the edge of a Balinese village on the day of Nyepi, you can hear things that have been there all year and that no one has noticed in decades. The wind through a banyan tree, a gecko on a temple wall, a neighbor's cooking fire, banned but tolerated in cases of small children, popping faintly behind a closed gate. The sea, much further than expected, still moving. In Balinese theology, the silence is functional. The day exists, in part, to convince the demons that the island has been deserted. The Ogo-Ogo parade the night before drew the spirits out. The chaos confused them. The flames consumed many. The silence the next day is meant to persuade the remaining ones that there is no longer anything here for them, that Bali, the place they were looking for, is empty, that they should leave. At a deeper level, the silence is for the Balinese themselves. The day is one of fasting, meditation, and self-examination, of resetting the cycle. The Saka year begins not with a celebration, but with stillness. The new year is born in a hush. Tourists, when they arrive in Bali in March, are sometimes warned about Nyepi by their hotel 3 days in advance. They are told to stock up on snacks. They are told to stay inside. They are told that even from inside the hotel, they should keep the lights low at night and not make noise. The expectation is rarely understood. The mood is sometimes resented. Many flights are rebooked. But for the Balinese, Nyepi is the most important day of the year. It is the day on which an island whose economy depends on never stopping, on always being open, always welcoming, always smiling, finally, deliberately stops. It is the day on which Bali briefly belongs to itself. From outer space, on the night of Nyepi, satellites have photographed Bali as a dark hole in a sea of electric light. Java glows, Lombok glows. Even small Nusa Penida glows faintly. Bali, on the night of Nyepi, is the only place in the archipelago where the lights are off. One island, 24 hours. No sound. If a visitor were ever going to understand what Bali actually is, this would be the day to be there.
Almost no one is.
At 6 in the morning on the day after Nyepi, Bali begins again. The fires return, the lights come back, the motorbikes start, the temples open their gates, the Pekalang go home, the airport reopens. Within a few hours, the planes begin to land again, and a new arrival of visitors disembarks on a Tuesday or a Thursday into a Bali that has, in the night they were sleeping over the Indian Ocean, started a new year. They will not know. They will not feel the difference. They will not know that the streets they are riding through were silent for a day, that the demons have been confused and dispatched, that the calendar has rolled over, that the next 210-day cycle has begun. And in some ways, that is the point. The Balinese have not done this for the tourists, they have done it for themselves. The tourists are guests in a ceremony they did not know was happening. The same is true of almost every layer this island carries. The penjor poles bending over the road during Galungan, the household offerings on the doorstep, the Pawukon week with its overlapping cycles, the Subak farmers meeting in a temple by a lake, the Bali Aga in their walled villages weaving cloth that takes 5 years to finish, the hush of the Pekalang on the day of silence, the 1,000-year-old promise that the mountain is sacred and the sea is the place where impurity goes. None of it depends on being witnessed. None of it is performed. The Balinese have a way of leaving the Kanang Sari on the doorstep at sunset that almost no foreigner ever asks about. The offering is not collected by the family. It is left, gradually, to be dispersed by the wind, the birds, the dogs, the rain. The point of the offering is the giving. What happens to it afterwards belongs to the world. The fear, increasingly, is that what is being left behind is not the offering, but the island. The water table is falling, the rice fields are shrinking, the penjor poles still rise, but they rise now over villages where most of the working-age population is employed in tourism. The young farmers are leaving. The Bali Aga villages are emptying. The residents of Trunyan increasingly migrate to Denpasar for work, returning only for ceremonies. The Bali starling, once nearly extinct, is recovering, but its forest is the smallest national park left on the island, surrounded on all sides by development. The question Trihita Karana has always asked, whether the three relationships are in balance, is not, on this island, a question with a clear answer. Bali has survived the fall of the Majapahit Empire, the arrival of the Dutch, 2 mass royal suicides, 1 volcanic catastrophe, the killings of 1965, the rebuilding of a tourist economy from nothing on 3 different occasions. It is one of the most resilient cultural systems anywhere on Earth. Whatever its visitors see, the deeper Bali is still there, operating in the doorways, in the lanes between the rice fields, in the temple at the lake, in the silence of one day each year. What is not clear yet is how much of that the next century will be able to hold. The real Bali is not somewhere else. It is not hidden. It is happening, right now, in the lanes that the rental cars drive past on the way to the next beach. It does not announce itself. It does not need to. And if you ever decide to stop, on a back lane, on a Thursday afternoon, on a doorstep with a small palm leaf basket of rice and incense and a single flower, you will be standing inside the center of an island that for at least 1,000 years has been doing this, whether anyone was watching or not. Take a breath. Stay a while. Thanks for watching, and until the next journey.